Thank you very much, Stephen. Thanks to IFI for hosting the film today and for the support for the documentary community here in Ireland, North and South, with this festival of the weekend. Congratulations to Roisin on a fantastic film, and also to the producer and editor, Sam Howard, is also here today. A round of applause for both of them. Also joined by Danny Morrison, who you all know from the film, on publicity director. And don't forget to vote for your film, vote for this film. You've got your slips, and I'll remind you again at the end. This was richly deserved, amazing work by Roisin. So tell me, Roisin, why did you decide that this was the right time to look back at this moment and the ban, and what was prescient about it, what was important about it for us to learn from this?
Yeah, so kind of a long story, but I'll do the short version. I had been researching basically what I was thinking of as counter cinema of the 80s about 2 years ago, and I've become really interested in kind of the shared roots of sort of civil rights movements, both in the north of Ireland and also in Britain at the time. So basically looking at the links between something like the Brixton riots and sort of movements that were taking place in the north, and I was interested in how cinema was basically able to captivate this, but also the shared links between different film groups that were working at the time, and generally they were working under the Workshop Declaration and formed part of the Workshop movement. The Workshop Declaration was, like you've heard all this before, but I'm going to keep saying it. The Workshop Declaration was this thing that Channel 4 had brought in the 80s, which was about democratizing filmmaking and essentially offering both kit, airtime and training to underrepresented communities on British TV. And a lot of incredible groups came out of that workshop movement, including Sankofa, Black Audio Film Collective that Jonah Comfer came from, and Derry Film and Video Workshop in the north. And they all knew each other, they all worked together, they shared a certain politics, and so I became very interested in that solidarity. And I started basically being interested in Derry Film and Video Workshop. As part of that, I essentially started to look a little bit through what they're doing, and it wasn't possible to make a film about that. However, I looked at their kind of seminal film, Mother Ireland, which basically traces the shared sort of heritage of republicanism, nationalism and feminism in Irish history. And it had a very sort of complicated broadcasting history in that it had been finished in '88, and I had an interview with IRA member Mairead Farrell, who had been then assassinated a couple of weeks after they finished the film and it was ready for broadcast. Had been assassinated by SAS in Gibraltar famously, and the film was never shown. It actually got screened for the first time in 2001 as part of actually a censorship season that they ended up doing. But it was never shown, so I became really interested in the ban, and the main thing I knew of the ban was, of course, the kind of famous Chris Morris sketch, but I hadn't quite realised to what extent it had touched everything, you know, as we see the sausage rolls episode, or even, you know, Jerry Adams being dubbed in like Republican sort of tool to look for Republican activists and stuff. So that became really intriguing. And then, of course, you know, simultaneously, I suppose, Brexit was happening. I was living in London, and what was just so apparent was the kind of gap in public knowledge, but also public imagination around the North. That the British public really just, there was a big lacuna in their knowledge, and not to say ignorance, but they basically just really were uninformed, and the North seemed very neglected, and there was this kind of confusion around how the north of Ireland could be so central to Brexit negotiations. And then simultaneously, I just moved from Dublin, where I lived for 10 years, and there was like, we'd had all of this kind of decade of centenaries, right? And there was a newfound interest in republicanism, and there also had been that kind of moral panic around a young electorate voting for Sinn Féin, which obviously we don't have since they've dropped in the polls quite significantly here at the moment. But at the time it was really interesting, and so the ban became a really ideal vehicle with which to explore all of these things.
So we'll come back and pick up more on that, and I'll get some questions from the audience as well. So we've got some mics, so I'll do a couple of questions to the guys and then I'll come to the audience. But Danny, did you, given the position you were in 1988, have any fear of this ban and what it actually was going to do in terms of your job in order to get the message out there to the world what Sinn Féin's position was?
Well, I think that the ban formalised culture of censorship that was prevalent, not just from government, but also from among certain journalists as well. Just to give you a pocket history, I mean, Sinn Féin was banned throughout the history of the state of the North. It changed its name to Republican Clubs in the mid-60s to overcome that ban, and the name Republican Clubs was banned by William Craig, the Minister of Home Affairs. The troubles start, it's a partial executive, Sunningdale, and it's only in 1974 that Sinn Féin is unbanned. At that time we registered Republican News as the post office as a newspaper. But the censorship continued in 1977, 1978. The entire staff of Republican News was arrested, including myself. We were charged with conspiracy. We were put in jail. They actually charged Gary Kennedy, a member of the SDLP, who published the paper in Lurgan. And that was to ensure that no other printer in the North would publish Republican News. So I was well used to this atmosphere and this attitude towards us. Anytime that we did an interview, for example, anytime Robin Day interviewed me or Jeremy Paxman, it was always hostile. You were never given the same approach as they would give to any other politician. So that's the way we were operating in. When we were challenged to run for election, when we ran for election, I was elected to the Assembly from the Ulster in 1982. 2 weeks later, I was banned from entering Britain and speaking in Britain for the next 14 years. This is before the broadcasting ban. So if I had gone into England to speak at a university, I'd been sentenced to 5 years in jail. At the time that Thatcher introduced this, she was in Poland preaching to the Polish people and the government there that there should be freedom of speech. So they're total hypocrites. So this was the attitude that we were operating in. When we were elected to the Assembly in 1982, the NIO then banned us from receiving all state papers that a political party would receive in terms of statistics of housing and environment, etc., etc., etc. So all of this, we were always trying to be shut down. When we called a press conference on social services, on housing, it was the media that turned us into proxy spokespersons, allegedly for the IRA. So the media would say, what about the IRA did this last week, the IRA did that, answer this question. Because as Director of Publicity, 80% of the statements from the Republican Press Centre were about housing, unemployment, health, social services, the environment, transport. But every time it was the media who came to us and tried to turn us into proxy spokespersons, and Thatcher obviously exploited that. Now, back in the early days, in 1972, Paul McCartney's response to Bloody Sunday was the radio song Give Ireland Back to the Irish. It was banned by the BBC. It wasn't a song about the IRA, it wasn't a song about Sinn Féin. It was banned. And later, when the broadcasting ban is brought in, the Pogues are banned for a song about the innocence of Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4. They even banned the Dubliners because the song Kelly from Killeen referred to as the rebellion in 1798. So this is the hostility now. And just as it was never going to defeat the IRA, it was never going to interfere with the IRA. How was it banned when it interfered with the IRA business? It was designed to censor the legitimate argument that we were putting that Britain has no right to be here. Had no right to be here for the last 800 years and has no right to be here today or tomorrow. And that's what it was about. And preventing the British public from hearing that argument.
Roisin, I suppose it could be a sequel or a prequel, really, if you looked at Section 31. Obviously, that had come many years before. You have a line, but you decided not to obviously look at the ban in the south here. Can you tell us a little bit why you made that decision?
I think, very simply, Section 31 was so much more draconian, essentially, than Thatcher's ban. as in it was all appearances outright, and even like in print media, you know, we focus on broadcast media here. So in a sense, it would have been a completely different film. I think, in a way, what we wanted to focus on was the farcical nature of it, one, but also I think what was very interesting to us was this kind of meditation on the voice, essentially, which is, you know, anytime that anyone, you know, you kind of sort of start to explain what the film is about, they go, oh yeah, remember that, why were they obsessed with the voice? And I think that was something that myself and Sam became quite obsessed with as well. And it was this idea of sort of this, you know, divorcing the voice from the body, this kind of dismemberment of meaning, what it does, and how we kind of are seeing similarities in the present around that. You know, at one point we sort of thought about doing things around deep fakes and generative AI and stuff like that. Obviously that would have been a completely different film. But like, you know, we were interested in that. And I mean, you know, the thing about the kind of meditation on sort of Jerry's voice being distinctive, the thing is about, it's actually how do you vilify someone, how do you dehumanize someone, how do you take apart an identity so that you create a culture where there is no sympathy, where certain laws can be passed, where certain actions can be taken with total impunity. And of course there's a lot of relevance and resonance in the present moment with that.
And Danny, do you talk about the state media and something we've been looking at in terms of the state's media in protecting the dominant narrative of the state? Do you think that the state media in the UK could have done more to challenge the ban, or did they push it as far as they could go with the Stephen Ray and the Conor Grimes of the actors?
Well, firstly, what's depicted about the voiceovers, and also we had asked for a health warning to be put out. You know, for example, if you're watching Al Jazeera now, the journalist who's based in Jordan will say we're not allowed into Gaza or Israel to report on matters. That only lasted a very short time. And I mean, there was a practical reason for it, of course. If a news breaks at 5 o'clock and Jerry Adams issues a statement, they're going to find it very hard to find a journalist to do a voiceover. So what we discovered, and the film mentions that, the statistics, that if I'm on the radio, if somebody, another journalist will hear that, and that may generate another story, another interest. So we had like 500 inquiries in 4 months prior to it, and it dropped to about 110 inquiries in 4 months after. So it was hurting. I mean, there's no left-wing phrase, you know, repression breeds resistance. But repression also works, which is why governments use it. And in this case here, Thatcher did cut into our voice. It also, for example, at an electoral level, they allowed us to be interviewed for the 2 weeks of an election, which is every 4 years. But elections are won between elections, not just during that election time. And it allowed the SDLP a monopoly to be on the media. And even prior to the ban, because the Ulster Unions and the DUP wouldn't sit in the same studio as us, the journalists, the BBC and UTV, excluded us from the studio. They interviewed us separately, and I always argued that argued this dozens of times, okay, you're going to interview me, let my interview go out after the panel discussion. But no, they would put my interview out first, and then we would be taken asunder by Seamus Mallon and the DUP and the UUP. And it was completely unfair. And as I said, there was also a history of hostile reporting. So I don't think the BBC, or the NUJ, decided to call a 24-hour walkout in protest, and they abandoned it. Because it's not really about the BBC and ITV, it's the government. So they said, and they're going to help us lobby. And they went along with it, and interest dropped off. And in my opinion, that contributes to the conflict, because you want a resolution of conflict, and of course the British government eventually had to come around and talk to Sinn Féin and recognise Sinn Féin's mandate.
You know, the ban was a fairly brutal response by Thatcher and the British government, but governments around the world still use tools in order to prevent certain voices to be heard. I mean, is that something that today, that's why this, looking back at this moment and looking at the very much more pernicious nature of what governments do to voices they don't want to hear around the world today?
No, absolutely. I mean, like, the film ended up being made, you know, in the backdrop of the last year and what's been happening in Gaza and now in Lebanon, and that entirely informed the direction the film eventually took. we were interested, like, the things that were invoked in order to pass the ban were the licensing agreement that the state has with the BBC, and then it was also the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So this was like an early form of the war on terror, basically. It's an early iteration of the war on terror. And the Prevention of Terrorism Act was brought in mainly to deal with the problem of the North of Ireland. And it only actually changed, and the language in it and the wording of it only changed after the London bombings. And the sort of the suspect community, sort of the Paddy Hilliard thing of like the suspect community moved from being the Irish, Northern Irish, to being Muslim extremists, right? So that was absolutely something that we were interested in, and what is, really, that we couldn't have predicted is just how, even this week, even the story around Michael D. Higgins and stuff, and the way that he, even when he defended the letter that he'd sent, to the new president of Iran, he said, the media manipulated my language. I can't control it if you manipulate my language. So we're just seeing that happen constantly, or even, the Gaza Media Bias Agency came out and they showed how British media has absolutely given Israeli narratives and talking points priority over and constantly. And I mean, it is what sort of Jerry Adams says in the film, where media is obviously, part of the state's arsenal, but it's also a frontal on which a war is being fought, and that is so apparent in the last year, and it's just been, and the kind of level of state and media complicity has been so extreme that this, far from feeling like, this is an archive film, it feels old and dated, and remarkably, it feels very proximate, it feels very proximate to the present moment, essentially.
Absolutely, feels very vital. Could we get a couple of questions now from you guys? The microphone. I think the gentleman in the glasses here first. That's you.
Looks like a veteran journalist, doesn't it?
It does look like a veteran journalist, yes. Down to Braden, everyone, former Irish Times correspondent in the north. We can't hear you, Declan, maybe.
It's subjected to the broadcast.
Get Stephen Ray to voice it.
Maybe I have to change my voice. Just want to say it's a really excellent film. In fact, I wish it was longer, which is really always the case. I'd love if you could do one on the southern section 31, because I was working as a print journalist at the time, although it didn't officially apply to newspapers. It was, and I didn't support the IRA campaign, but I suppose, a kind of a Daniel O'Connell Republican, if you like, get freedom so long as you don't spill any blood. But anyway, I'm kind of proud that I think I was the first journalist to interview Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness for the Irish Times. But it is really, the whole thing brings back a lot of memories about what a shocking time, what a terrible time it was, and how lucky we are to have the peace that reigns now. And I hope that my 6 grandchildren will never have to experience what we experienced back in the 70s and 80s.
Hello? Hi. Gentlemen, the Wookmine virus got me. Anyway, that was a joke, but I'm a documentary filmmaker myself, so I find when I watch documentaries, they're more engaging when there's an appropriate aesthetic to them, when they're cinematic. So I thought the use of archive footage that was really well chosen, it really set time and place well, but you also chose font around it, or the music. I don't know if that was existing music or if you worked with a composer, but if you could, I think just talk a bit about that from the pitching stage to the final mix, like how you craft the sort of cinematic vibe of a documentary. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, well, just hold it a second, Roisin. We'll take another question. We'll come to you. This gentleman here in the middle, can we get the mic? Or maybe you could answer that question, Roisin, just before the gentleman.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for that. we always talk about the politics and I never get to talk about the filmmaking. Yeah, so basically, as I kind of said, I ended up going into Northern Ireland Screen Archives to actually research a film that had been made under the workshop declaration called Acceptable Levels, which actually had been made. It was about media bias during the Troubles, and it was shot by the same crew who shot Pat Murphy's Maeve, and it's actually it's never been broadcast because one of the things about the workshop declaration was the horizontality and the democratizing thing around it was also around copyright, which makes it a total nightmare. It means you actually can't, you have to contact 50 people in order to get permission. So I contacted one. And anyway, so I went in to see that, and essentially on the back of that was like, I actually want to make a film about the broadcasting ban. Would you commission it? And would you also give me some money? And that's kind of how we got the ball rolling. I'd also won a pitching competition prior to that from with Northern Ireland Screen at Docs Ireland, and so I have a little bit of money already. And then I basically approached Sam Howard, my producer, who had just been working on Lyra, the film on Lyra McKee, and I'd seen him pitch basically as well, and I was very impressed, and so I asked him would he do this film with me, and we essentially, really we just combed through all of Northern Ireland Screen Film Archives, and they gave us all access, and they did give us some money, and so we just spent like, I don't know, I think 6 months, maybe longer, a year. And in fact, it premiered in June, and I think we actually were still cutting it and changing things. That was my fault, like a week before. So we just spent ages coming through the archive, and then we almost made a feature film because we had so much stuff, and then we decided no, to like rein it in, make it much tighter, make it much more, and really be very specific. So it's predominantly Belfast. We really, almost everything is between 1988 and 1994, bar something that actually is referring back to something prior to that, but everything is very tight. And then we commissioned Oscar Kahn, Oxy, to compose a score for it, which is what we do. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. Gentleman with the microphone there.
This is on, yeah. You know, I commend you on making a film about this period, and
Speak up a little.
Congratulations on the film. I really enjoyed it. A lot more needs to be done, I think, about this period in Irish history, recent Irish history. I was thinking maybe talking to, and also I suppose it is prescient, thinking about Al Jazeera's office being shut down, I think, by the Israelis. I think they've all been arrested, or the office has been closed down. So very prescient. Danny, I'm just wondering as well about antagonism towards Sinn Féin in RTE. Because that's also a glaring kind of subject or issue. Up until very recently, Sinn Féin has been excluded, or there's been a very antagonistic, attitude towards Sinn Féin in the south. And is that something you could talk about?
Just before you answer, Danny, I'll take another question just to keep it going.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, first of all, congratulations on bringing out the contradictions inherent in the British ban, and it goes back to Britain's place in the world. Danny mentioned Thatcher in Poland arguing for freedom and so on, and saying the West was based on freedom, the East based on control. So I thought that was brought out very well. But I would like to make a plug for talking about Section 31 as well, because Section 31 was certainly comprehensive, but it was from about 1976 onwards when Conor Cruz O'Brien's legislation came in, which banned not only interviews but also reports of interviews, and that meant that RT could not do what the BBC did, which was to bring dub-in actors' voices. But also the story of RT is a story of a very long period of self-censorship, very severe self-censorship, which has consequences to this day, and it relates somewhat to the previous comment. So RT extended Section 31. The BBC banned representatives of Sinn Féin. So did Section 31. In that way they were similar. But RT extended it to ban all members of Sinn Féin, no matter what they were talking about or who they were representing. So they banned Phil Flynn, who was leader of the Public Services Union, and they banned an executive member of the Bakery Union, Larry O'Toole, who took RT to court, the High Court and the Supreme Court, and won. And when RT lost the High Court case, It had then a more liberal regime. It was told it could interview Sinn Féin members. RTE appealed to the Supreme Court. RTE appealed to be censored. Also, it should be said, the late John McCafferty was banned. And so there was a long period of silence in the South. And I think, sometimes you think, well, how can we do a documentary on silence? There are a lot of events in the context of Section 31. I was formerly Secretary of the European Section 31 campaign. There's a whole lot of incidents there which can, I think, be brought to bear in a documentary programme, and you might consider it.
If anyone from Screen Ireland is in the room and wants to comment on it,
Speak up historical commentary around the RTE.
In 1922, I'm not going back that far, in 1922, a group of solicitors in the north, priests and community people, produced a pamphlet about the sectarianism and the killings that featured at the time of the settlement of the Northern Ireland state. And the original Free State governments decided that they would publish it. And then they decided, hold on a minute, if we publish this, there's going to be sympathy for the people in the north. And we've got a group of Republicans in the Four Courts who, in all likelihood, we're going to be fighting quite soon. So that was the original Section 31. It was to stop the people in the 26 counties knowing the truth about what was going on in the north. It was even more egregious than the broadcasting ban, because back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, there was only 2 or 3 stations in the south of Ireland subjected to this. There was no satellite TV or anything like that. It was sort of introduced and policed by former members of the Workers' Party, in particular Owen Harris. If you read Mary McAleese's autobiography, the harassment she went through because she was a Northern voice, he called her and during the election, I think he called her a ticking time bomb. So this is the hostility that was inside RTE. You had a ridiculous situation where the UDA in the north was not banned. When Jerry Adams was shot, he couldn't be interviewed, but the people who shot him could be. In August 1981, when Owen Carn won the by-election following the death of Bobby Sands, RTE interviewed the loser, Ken McGuinness, major in UDR, but banned Owen Carn. And this way, people in the south were subliminally actually being to think in terms of, oh, these people are evil, and these are the poor unionists, misunderstood, etc. So it was pernicious. It was pernicious. And also, just to be critical of journalists, the NUJ went to Conor Cruz O'Brien, and this was their argument for end of Section 31. Let us at Morrison and McGuinness and Adams, and we will take them apart. And Conor Cruz O'Brien says, you must be joking.
Okay, we've got another question from the gentleman over here.
Thanks. I'd like to commend Roisin for a wonderful documentary. Thank you. And for wearing a cracking t-shirt. I'd also like to commend Trevor, who I know from years ago, and for his brave, courageous stand with Barry McCafferty in upholding press freedom. I'll not embarrass you, Donny. I just want to begin by the ban actually was more than the broadcasting ban. Over 400 school teachers fell under what was called the Hurt Law, and I was one of them. I was teaching in a secondary school in Glen Road, and the principal, Brother Maroney, phoned me on a Sunday evening to say that I couldn't come to work on the Monday morning because of the Hurt Act. Anyone who had been connected with republicanism in any way fell under this, including nursery school teachers teaching kids of 4 and 5 years of age in the Gaelic language. The only good outcome came for myself was that instead of being tied down in the Christian Brothers School in the Glen Road in West Belfast teaching young lads, it released me from 8 hours a day, and which meant I had an awful lot of spare time on my hand. I got arrested in South Armagh with 5 other cousins after my uncle's funeral, actually across McLean, and all 5 were called Michael James Conlon, which is a pretty common name in South Ireland. But they arrested us all and took us to Golf Barracks. And the British officers who were in charge of our interrogation were trying to find out. They'd got a piece of stupid information from someone, and they didn't actually know which one of us was connected. So they arrested all five of us, put us in the Chinook helicopter, zip-tied us, opened the doors at the back, and the soldiers tried to kick us out as we flew to Golf Barracks. It was terrifying, and that's what it was meant to do. When we got to Golf Barracks, I was interrogated for, I think it was 5 minutes, because the British Army knew the reality on the ground, and they actually started talking among themselves, and they were disgusted with the ban. They were disgusted. You know, like, think about this. One was a captain, and the other was a colonel in the Royal Anglican Regiment, and they're disgusted with their own Prime Minister. Because what it gave, they actually said, when he was teaching in the Christian Brothers in the Glen Road, they at least knew where I was 8 hours a day. I subsequently went on to stand 3 times for election, and that was one of the reasons they gave. I stood in 1985 in the university area and didn't get elected. But that was enough for me to fall under the wider ban by Douglas Hurd, who was then Secretary of State. I stood again in 97 and topped the poll in Belfast. I represented Ardoyne, and an RTE journalist asked me, what was the point in getting elected? What was the point? And I said, well, outside of Dáil Éireann, this is the 2nd largest elected chamber in Ireland, and we have now become the largest party in a unionist city. That was striking. After 4 years, it took its toll. My home was bombed twice. My office was hit with an RPG-7 in Ardoyne, and several of my colleagues were shot and assassinated and killed. All our homes were attacked, and it very, very rarely was on the 9 o'clock news. Suffice to say, I stood in the Shankill Road in 2001 and lasted until the 5th count. And a UVF friend of mine, Hugh Smith, God rest him, asked me why we were polling so well in the loyalist heartland. And I said, I believe your women think I'm Kenny Rogers. So again, commendations to the three of you. I'm going to be the man.
Thank you very much. Gentleman up the back with his hand up, and then we've got a gentleman over here as well. So we'll take these 3 questions in a row, and then I'll come back finally to Roisin and to Dan.
Well